Hello, everyone. Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. I'm your host, Olivia Atkin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Mark Wigginton. Mark is the founder and CEO of Focusing on Results, a premier coaching and consulting firm. With over 40 years of experience, Mark is a transformative coach who has helped countless individuals and executives achieve extraordinary results. His journey was profoundly shaped by the book Enlightened Leadership, Getting to the Heart of Change, which inspired him to master and teach the principles of effective questions and managing focus. As a licensed professional counselor and board-certified coach, Mark has been guiding business development executives and teams since 2001, helping them clarify their goals, organize their teams, and grow as leaders. Mark's pragmatic and humble approach empowers others to achieve their stretch goals, making them an invaluable resource in both professional and personal development. You can find Mark on LinkedIn by searching Mark Wigginton or by going to his website, focusingonresults.com, or by email at markw@focusingresults.com. Hello, Mark. It's fantastic having you on the show today.
Hey, Olivia, it's so happy to be here. It's listening to you kind of do that live is a real trip for me, as many hours as you've been in my ears. I'm a big fan.
Well, I truly appreciate it. And I'm so excited because you and I have had a few different conversations in the past. And I've personally loved connecting with you on your journey. And especially as someone who has come to me as a listener. And I've really enjoyed that aspect of our conversation as well.
Yeah.
So I'm excited that you get to now be on this side as well. But to start
Really
off the
cool.
show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Mark Wigginton?
So I have to tell you, before I answer that question, I have to say that, of course, as a listener, I knew it was coming. And I have given so much thought to it over the last week as we've gone through here. And it's changed 1,000 times as I've gone through the last week, really kind of just to really get it netted down. But I think what really has happened for me is that success has really changed for me in the last couple of years, particularly as I left full-time work. So I don't use the R word. I left full-time work. And it's really changed. I'm really learned a lot more about understanding that success to me means freedom, and it means freedom to choose. And it's a pretty easy definition, but what it really is about is throughout my career, particularly throughout the last 20 or so years of my career as a salesperson, I had a lot of things that I needed to learn and a lot of things that I needed to do, particularly for my customers, because the opportunities that I was supporting them on were so big and important. And I didn't have time to kind of learn and do fun things for me. And so now I get to do that. I get to read what I want, and I get to play with software, and I get to talk to people like you and do fun things instead of having, 20 projects that I have to have done, or they've got 20 things in my pipeline that I'm moving forward. So to me, that's success. It's that level of freedom.
And I think it's so important to, as we're going through life and different progressions in our life, to take a step back sometimes and go, what is the freedom I have?
Yeah.
I recently I was having this similar conversation with someone here in Alaska who was also a spouse of someone who just transitioned to the base and had to sadly give up her role because of the relocation. And I was like, what do you want to do? And she was just like, I really don't know.
Yeah.
And she looked scared in telling me that.
Yeah.
And I said, you have the most powerful tool right now, the freedom to choose and create a job and what that looks like for you that you don't typically have, you wouldn't have if it wasn't for
Right.
this. And that's the perfect time to do it, is really sit back and evaluate in a change that might seem daunting. What is going on? What's going to make me happy? What are the tasks in those roles that I previously did that I really enjoyed? And how much of the job do I want to give up for those personal things that I want to do?
Yeah. I mean, you kind of It's so funny that you say that because you read that great introduction that talks about the business side of my practice. But the real kind of focus of my practice now is helping people who are going through transition. And a lot of times the starting point for people going into transition is dealing with work, dealing with some kind of situation that's changed their environment, their job, whether it was a layoff or a downsizing. We both have that common experience of understanding what that's like and how that can impact you. And so really helping people understand, like your friend, helping her understand that the first thing you have to do is recognize that there's an end and that there's a grief process, and to let go of how it was, and that's okay. And then you kind of move into the middle and it's all messy and gooey. And, it's like a lot of folks now talk about it as a chrysalis, like a butterfly transition. And then you come out with a new beginning on the far side, and you're able to take all those lessons, everything that you kind of consolidated in that big messy middle, and you're able to move it forward. So you're right on track. She is in a perfect place. And it takes a minute to realize that because it is so scary.
And I think too, and you touched upon this of how we could both relate to that transition.
Oh yeah.
For me, when I was part of the mass layoffs, luckily I had started my business. So I just had a decision to make, right? Looking for the next job or going into this full time. But it's also that feeling, and I would love to know your experience of just going, okay, what now though? Like,
Yeah.
I had this guaranteed income. When I say guarantee, you knew the check was coming, right?
Right. Every 2 weeks.
You knew it was coming. You knew your hours. You knew what to expect in the role. And then it all gets ripped away suddenly for whatever reason it might be. And now, like you mentioned, and I think you mentioned it in a great way, it's making sure you're also taking the time to grieve all of that happened and go, okay, now I'm just stepping into the unknown and I have to figure out those waters in order to progress forward in a positive way.
Yeah. It's so funny. As you were speaking, it kind of took me back to a really early part of my career. And so after school, I moved to Houston with my wife, and I worked in a couple of jobs, and ultimately I wound up here in Austin. And I worked for one of the really first kind of Silicon Valley startup companies that made it really big. It was a company called Roam. It was ultimately bought by IBM. And what Roam did was like the very first computerized telephones. Now iPhones, blah, blah, blah. But then it was a huge deal to have these computerized phones where you could press a little code and put the phone on hold and, all that kind of stuff. And the most interesting thing happened to me as I was doing that work. When we first moved to Houston, I had a psych degree, and I was working at night analog psych ward. And in the daytime, I was training people how to use these new phones. And there was so much fear around the new technology, and so I'd use my skills more strongly working with, normal people in the daytime than I was at night. And then that led me to become a designer of those phone systems. I came to Austin. I worked on the IBM project, which was the kind of the largest system that Rome had ever done. And now I had to deal with a different group, but the same issue. These are people who had been in their office at their desk for like 20 years, and were going to have to change their telephone numbers. And the trauma that they had to go through changing their telephone numbers was overwhelming. So take it one more step forward. In my early 30s, at 30, I left Rome. I went back to school. I got a master's degree in counseling psychology. I came out with my brand new counseling degree 3 years later, and it was just the time that IBM was going through layoffs. So with my IBM background, I knew the plant here in Austin. I knew the people. I got tagged by the team that went in to work, the consultant team that went in to work the layoff. So now I'm sitting here with the same people who I was sitting with 3 years ago, who were freaking out about their telephone number, and they've just been laid off. Mm-hmm. And they were told, 20 years ago when they came to IBM, that as long as they did a good job, they'd have a good job. And, it was Olivia, it was a life-changing experience for me to be there with them, to then work in the career center, to work with them and help them work their way through it. And I swore that I would never put myself in that position, that I would never be in a position where I would rely on a company, for that regular paycheck, right? That I would always have things in reserve, that I would try to manage my own business and kind of work through my own process. And that really impacted me profoundly. For the next 15 years, I was a journeyman. I traveled in lots of different jobs and had lots of different opportunities. And a lot of it comes back to those specific conversations.
And I think it's so important to highlight there in that example, the aspect of that we're really seeing within companies more and more now, that it doesn't
Yeah.
matter your loyalty to the company. At the
Right.
end of the day, it's all about the numbers, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to take a step back and realize it's not a personal thing. You could be doing the best job, but
Yeah.
like I remember when I was laid off, I had a very um I had a very personal conversation with one of the HR personnel. And I was just like, I was told I was good. Like, we knew
Yeah.
the layoffs were coming a month
Yeah.
earlier. We were told by March 1st we would know. It was March 7th when we actually found out. So
Yep.
we all thought we were safe. And I said, I'm handling 16 contracts. Like, I don't understand. No one else is
Yeah.
doing this. They're not going away. And she said to me, Olivia, had nothing to do with your performance.
Right.
We looked at your pay number and your qualifications brought you in so high, and you have such a knowledge base that you're getting paid higher than someone and there was just someone they had brought in who was very new that they brought on a month earlier.
Yeah.
And they're like, he's the very bottom of the pay scale. So like the salary we'd be taking away from you would benefit us more than that new person.
Right.
And like, it may take them time to, get up to speed, but it's the money. And
Right.
that touched me. But what was more, as I was going through that, which was hard for me, I also watched individuals who were 20 years into their career.
Yeah.
Always worked for Lockheed Martin, and they're a few years away from retirement.
Yep.
And they've been doing the same role for 20 years, and they're going, oh no, like, we'll help you find another job, but
Right.
that's it. So for you, and I mentioned this in part of the intro, the book Enlightened Leadership, Getting to the Heart of Change, was something that made that really big impact for you. What was it about that book and the time around the time you were reading it as well that really left that imprint on you?
It was really, really cool. So you froze, so I'm going to keep talking here. So, I mentioned already that I had gone back to school and got my master's degree in counseling psychology, and I had worked for 8 years in community mental health, and was, working in every different place you can imagine. My primary gig was that I was working at the jail here in Travis County in Austin, but I worked in every rehab center. I worked in every mental health setting there was, trying to just make a living as I went through. And part of that, obviously, you go to counselor school and you learn about asking really good questions. And what I learned about in Enlightened Leadership was about asking questions in a really different way. So when you work as a therapist or you work as a counselor, you're looking at root causes. You're kind of doing a root cause analysis. So you're really focused on reasons for people's behavior, right? Let's figure out the reason, and then we can make a change. And what Enlightened Leadership did for me was open up this whole world of focusing on results. That's why my company is called Focusing on Results, directly out of the Enlightened Leadership book. And I learned a new way of asking questions, sequenced questions that I was teaching salespeople, I was teaching managers, folks like that, to be able to, to work with their teams, to be able to manage their focus on the results that they were looking for, rather than drawing them back to reasons that they couldn't perform. And that was such a profound impact for me. And because I was working as a consultant, I was traveling all over the country, Canada, so all over North America, and I was seeing it applied in all these different areas, all these different roles. And then I would take the skills and I would partner with sales coaches, sales managers, and do sales coaching, or partner with sales teams and, listen to calls in call distribution groups and things like that, and help them work on applying those skills as well. So it was just so profound. And it still is just such a profound tool that I use, and understanding the real characteristics, forward focus questions, and the difference between what I had already learned as a counselor.
And I think it's important to sometimes ask yourself why you are asking a certain question, right? And
Yep.
this goes off exactly what you were saying. It's what is the result that you want to get? Are you asking the question to kind of put a halt to something, prove a
Right.
point that can't be done? Or are you trying to find the solution? And if you already know the solution and you have to work backwards, start from the top and work your way down by asking those more in-depth concentrated questions. So for you, as you've delved into this career and this path of taking a step back, asking those questions, challenging the thought process, and look at question asking, has there been a point where when you were really leaning into it, or even now, that you're like, oh, I need to ask better questions, or how do I
Oh, yeah.
ask the right question?
I'm always learning. I'm always learning to ask better questions. Particularly working as a coach now, it's one of the things that I really work on my desktop. There's probably, documents. There's probably 500 different questions in a folder that I have called coaching questions that come from other people that I'm looking at and I adapt and I use in my practice. But, throughout the kind of the 20 years of my sales career, particularly working with business development teams, I was using them every day. I mean, you dealt with the contract side of those of proposals, receiving and reviewing them. And what I was doing was selling professional services to companies that were providing them. So very high stress situation, or to companies like Lockheed, right? So they would be producing the proposal. And so, we would you go into this high pressure situation and you'd have to be using those kind of forward focused questions to get people to talk about what the real benefits were to the company. So the Lockheed people were working on a helicopter, and what are the real benefits for that helicopter? What can you do that's different? And really helping them get down to really understanding that. So I use those questions like every day. And then you use those questions. I would use those questions dealing with the stress in the team as well, both the customer team and the consulting team that I was placing on the ground. So it's just this constant process of really, mining people for gold, right? Mining people to get to their real unique answers and what they as individuals bring to the team, and then ultimately what the team would bring to the ultimate customer to go through. Can I step back for a minute to your story about Lockheed?
Yes.
I not to go too far because I know we can both go into the layoff thing. I just, one of the things that I remember and that I teach a lot and that I learned at the same time that I was going through this process of learning about enlightened leadership, one of the consultants I work with used to always say, there's nothing more important to your customer than their customer, right? And so if there's nothing more important to your customer than their customer, the sad news is sometimes that's us. The bottom line, like you said, it was more important to save whatever the percentage was between your salary and the new person's salary than the quality of the work. Because who's the ultimate customer to Lockheed? The shareholder, right? So it's, and that comes true so much. Everywhere you look, the fact that there's nothing more important to your customer than their customer. Today in the job search, as people are going through their job search, I talk to my clients over and over again about that. When they take it, you read in the Wall Street Journal or whatever, you hear about people are being ghosted, right? Or they're getting, they do 60 interviews with different companies and they never get a bite, or they get to the place where the company says, you're right there, we're going to give you an offer letter. And then a week, 10 days, 2 weeks go by and you didn't get the offer letter. And it's like, well, you know what? The reality is there's nothing more important to your customer than their customer. And so you have to take a back seat for a minute and be patient. That's a really hard thing for people to do.
And it is. And it's something that no matter what aspect of life or professionalism you're at, right? And I use the word professionalism in the aspect of if you're the entrepreneur and the business owner, or and that consultant, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
or you are mid-level management at a massive company, that pressure still lives. And we always forget, I think sometimes, that then the day, even though you want results, if you're dealing with someone else who has different clients, it's tends to like, you will kind of get that ghosting. You know, I recently dealt with something where I am potentially partnering with someone else to help some of their clients. And we had a few amazing initial calls to do podcast consulting for their podcasts, and there's some top podcasts. And we got a game plan. We wrote out the whole outline, did all this stuff, and she was just like, "Okay, we'll get the ball rolling. I'll reach out." And like 4 days go by, and I'm the kind of person that I'm
Yeah.
like, "Okay, I'm used to like having that assignment, getting it done. Like let's move forward. Let's keep the momentum going." And I'm like, "What's happening?" And I start following up. And I'm like, what can I do to help? Like, do you want me to write the email? Do you want me to do this? And I'm doing all the processes and trying to move it forward as much as I can. And finally, she had a very transparent conversation with me. And she was like, Olivia, it's just like I've had other things on my plate
Yeah.
and you're just pushing me. And I'm like, I don't mean to push you. It's now 2.5 weeks have gone by.
Right.
And we have goals in place, and I want to meet those goals for the both of us, and I'm
Right.
excited to work with your clients. And it dawned on me the same thing you're saying right now of like, she, because she's not getting any monetary money at this very moment from
Yep.
me, the people she is getting money from are the ones she's focusing on, and if she gets to me, she gets to me. And
Yeah.
so you have to realize that sometimes it isn't how you work or the performance you give, or you know, there's these other reasons. At the end of the day, it's just the reason of they don't want to do something that messes up their client. So if their client
Yeah.
comes to them first, you got to deal with it.
Right. You know, and it all goes back to Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits, and he talks about things that are important but not urgent, right? And that's the reality of the situations, that they're important, but there are urgent things that maybe that are less important, but they're more urgent that somebody's attention has to go to. And accepting that's a real challenge.
Yeah. And it's something that I think no matter how much you know in the back of your head, or like
Yeah.
it just creeps up. It does that creep up.
Yeah. And it's hard. Like when you're a salesperson, you know, this kind of a lot of the frame that I come from when I'm working with my clients, particularly career clients, is I take them into a sales frame and I'm like, listen, this job search is a sale and you're the product, right? And so we're going to talk a lot about pipelines, and we're going to talk a lot about closing, and we're going to talk a lot about customer and research and those kind of things as we go through, because that's what you're really doing. I mean, you're selling, you're the product, and that's scary because you are the product, you know, and your house note might be dependent on this based on the period of time that you're out of work as you go through. So you're right. I mean, we've got to, I help them understand the importance of you know, just because it's important to you, and even though they said it was important to them, things change day to day, as you know from your own work life, right? As we all do from our own work life. Yeah, I've listed 10 things that are, you know, on my priority list. I have them numbered. I'm a little obsessive, even though I have left full-time work. You know, I have them numbered, and I might get through 1 through 4, and then something else comes up, and I'm going a totally different way.
And I'm the same way. I have it written in my planner, and then I will sometimes even number it and take it a step farther, just so I know if something comes up where the priority needs to be, or reversed thought process. Okay, I start my day and I have a clean slate. What needs to get done first, so that if things come up in my schedule during the day, I can pivot knowing that those things that do have deadlines that are higher priority than others are still getting done.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for all of us to think about, as well as like making those lists and taking the time in the morning or before you leave for the day before, and go, okay, what is the list for tomorrow? Like, I know what I have to do, but let's focus it even more to figure out that list. And for you, you know, when we talk about question asking and this whole process, and really remembering that it isn't just about the question you ask, but the answer you want to receive. And when I say that, it's the in-depth, the thought-provoking questions. So when we think of thought-provoking questions, at least for me, I think of those moments that it's going to hit and help me grow, help my team grow, and really move the ball forward in that aspect. But it is also something that when you ask a question, you have to be ready and prepared for the answer you might receive.
Right.
So for you, when we talk about these thought-provoking questions, what truly does a thought-provoking question mean to you?
So you just asked a really thought-provoking question, right? You really asked a really a forward-focused question, because you asked me an open-ended question, and you asked me a question that I am an expert in answering, because you asked my opinion, right? So that's a key element of a thought-provoking question. So open-ended, moving forward. Again, I try to avoid why questions, but there are things that start with what and start with when and how, drawing your attention to the results that you're looking for. The person who you're talking to is the expert, because you're trying to get their opinion, their view, so that you can bring all that content into the team as you go through. And they start broad and they dig deeper. Again, that's one of the things I see you do a lot on your podcast. As I listen to them, you start with a broad question, and then it kind of narrows down. So what's working? What makes it work? What's the goal? What's the benefit of the goal? Things like that. How can we move closer to, what can we do to move closer to the goal as you come through? But you also talked about another really important element of it as the asker, right? As the asker of the question, the most important thing that you have to do is really be tuned and listening, and actively be engaged in listening. I heard one of your folks recently talk about listening with your neck. And it was like the guy from Florida, the person that you had from Florida, and you talk about listening. He was talking about listening with your neck, like really leaning in and really being engaged in it. And that's what you have to do, be super, super present. And so then there's a superpower question, one single superpower question. You ready for the big secret? As we go through, it's the easiest question in the world, and it's what else? So you ask somebody a question, you get the answer, you reflect the question back to them, and you ask them, what else? What else is important about that? And they're going to go another level deeper. And you reflect back and you ask, that's great. What else do you think is important? And they go still another level deeper. And what happens kind of to all of us is that we have stock answers. If your manager or your boss is going to ask you a question, you kind of have an answer on the top of your head. When you ask, you get away from that, from that stock answer, and you really start to thinking about it. And then when you get to the next level, the person's really engaged. So if you're in a sales situation and you ask what else to your customer, you're really going to start to get to what they're looking for. What are the real benefits that they're after? They're going to give you their throwaway question, their throwaway answer, and then you're going to get at a deeper level. In a management session, where you're trying to work with coaching with one of the people in your company or in your team, same thing's going to happen. They're going to know you're serious about, what are your career goals? What else do you want to do? How can we fix this? How can we, change what it is that the results that we're getting from our company? So, what else just becomes a cool question. And when you're in a group, it's even more powerful, because you can get away with asking it more, right? You can get away with, like, I have gotten away with 5 cycles of what else before I started getting the skunk eye from the audience, or from the group. So if I'm doing a formal presentation, I get, you break the section and you ask people that, or in a training group, or, doing team training, whatever. You can get away with 3 with an individual before it's kind of, and you get away with 5 to 7. 5 is really kind of pushing it, but if you get them laughing, you can get away with 7. What else is in sequence? So I want to just add to that as well. So I talked about learning that in Enlightened Leadership, but it's something that comes up in a lot of different books. And for your audience that are kind of not coaches, but are in management roles, there's an awesome book by a guy named Michael Bungay Stanier called The Coaching Habit. And he has a seven question sequence, and he calls it the awe question, and what else, as you go through. So it's something that's really built for folks who aren't professional coaches, who have gone to coaching school. But it's also, if you're a new coach, if you're listening to this and you're a new coach, it's also a really awesome book to use to help you structure your interviews.
And that form of questioning, like you mentioned, really makes you think and have to answer
Yes.
something in sometimes an out of box way. The first time
Right.
I used a question like that, I remember I was in college. I was a sophomore in college and I did what's called a startup competition. I don't know if they do it anymore, but it's this competition for companies who want to get off the ground, and it's for people who are in college, getting their master's, PhD, and
Yep.
beyond. And they do it in a handful of cities throughout the year, and then they have a massive thing. So what happens is 72 hours though. So in that 72 hours, people pitch their ideas, and then the people who win the pitch to the judges, everyone else has to figure out which company they would potentially want to work for and help develop, and they have
Yeah.
to go and help that individual. So I remember I ended up helping an individual who was from my university who also went, and our team was actually all Quinnipiac University students. And by the end of the weekend, they were not thrilled that I was on the team, because we'd sit down in the boardroom and get through like a process of, okay, we're going to offer this. And it was at the time an app that if you went to a rest stop and let's say your whole family wanted different things, and I bet all the parents out there have been there. They're like,
Yep.
oh, got to stand in 3 different lines now, right?
Yeah.
You can order it on the app and then it gets packaged and it's in one spot for when you walk
Very cool.
in. And it was something that if you were that school bus of kids from the athletic tournament or whatever, what bus stop, rest stop you're going to be stopping at, everyone can do their orders and then it'll pull from the restaurants. And I remember going, okay, great. So, but now what? Like, so what? Okay, well, what if they don't like this aspect? And I keep turning the question not in a I'm going to build you down kind of way, in a, okay, so what if this doesn't work?
Yeah.
How are we going to pivot? What if there's this, issue with this, or how else can we offer this? And all these things. And it got to a point where at one time they're like, why do you keep asking us, so what? Like, what's the point? What way are we going to do this? And I said, because you have to prepare for everything that could happen, every thought process someone might want to use the app for. And they were taken aback. And I was like, it's great to have that surface level idea and, reasoning for it, right? That, like you said, that standard answer. But until you go, okay, but what now? What else?
Yeah.
Why? It's only surface level, and you really got to dive deep into that. And so, Mark, for you as well, as you mentioned, it's really asking those what else questions so that it gets people out of the habit as well to take that step back. Because I think sometimes you go through a repetitive type of conversation with so many times, right? As you and I, who are both entrepreneurs, you probably have it when you're having initial calls. They can kind of get repetitive, but you need to be able to break that and be prepared when someone asks you, okay, but what else? What else am I going to get? Why would I do this? What was a moment that you were going through the process of getting asked those questions and you were like, light bulb moment?
Yeah, I don't know if I can give you a single moment, because it's been so ingrained in me for, really the last 27, 28 years that, that since I learned the skill set. So, it was just such a breakthrough at the beginning, and then working with people and really seeing and practicing the what else technique and idea has been something has been a real breakthrough. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, you do, because you know what? I think sometimes we think that there has to be one moment that makes a complete shift. And this is something that I do want to lead into. So you actually did a perfect leeway for me, is the aspect that one thing you and I had talked about previously is that how sometimes life's moments can come in a short burst, but that short burst can give you the recharge you might need and that mental space to go, okay, what am I doing? Where does my trajectory need to go?
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't know that those bursts are happening until months later.
Yeah.
So for you, what was a moment in your life that you really looked back on and said, okay, there was that burst that I had, and I didn't even know it was happening for myself, but 5 months later, I was like, oh, wow, that really shifted my mindset to where I am now.
About 20 years later, it's really easy for me to go back and we talked in our kind of earlier conversations about running, right? And about the different kind of about how that affected and how that changed my life, right? And that, there was a time in my mid 40s, I was on the road. I'd been on the road kind of continuously for 7 years in a bunch of different jobs, but I'd been continuing on the road. I was not living a healthy lifestyle. I mean, we can talk about that as much as you'd like, but just leave it right now that it was not a healthy lifestyle. And, I kind of learned over time that there are, when there were road, and this is all pre-COVID, right? So this is in the early 90s and early 2000s. And I learned that there were kind of two type of people that were in hotels all the time. They were the group that was in the hotel bar all the time. And there was the group that was in the hotel gym all the time. And being in one group led me to a significant amount of trouble, and we'll just leave it at that. So I began to find a way to shift into the other group, and I was with my wife, and we were visiting her cousin up in upstate New York, and she was running this race called the Boilermaker, which is a 15K race. And I had dabbled a little bit with running, but I never did anything serious. And we were there for the race, and I watched her run, and she was so proud. And so I said, I'm going to come next year and run this with you. And I did. I started to make lifestyle changes and tried to take better care of myself. And I went out and ran that race, and we ran it together. And, I turned to Cindy at the end and I said, Cindy, this 15K race, running a half marathon is only another 5K. So it's 21K. So another 5K. I think I did my math wrong. It's 6K. Anyway, I'm like, we could do that. And so she said, yeah, I'm willing to do that too. So she came down to Austin. We drove up to Dallas and went to a race. We were like, gosh, that was so much fun. There's going to be another one in November in Austin. And so she came back down and we ran that one. And that started me on this journey of transformation that my life completely changed, in that moment. And I saw it as I went, I lost weight and got healthy and kept weight off and ran longer and did a lot of different events. But it wasn't until really kind of the last year or so, because of another major life change that happened in my experience, that I went back and started really looking and seeing what the impact was, seeing how much I changed and how much my life was different because of that moment when I hit bottom, right? I was at a place where I was like, I can't continue to live this way. I've got to find something different to do. And it transformed every element of my life, transformed my work. I went from 1992 to 2007, so a 15-year period. Depending on how you want to count it, Olivia, I had somewhere between 12 and 20 jobs, depending on how you want to count it. If you want to count that I was working in 5 different places at the same time because, I was trying to make things happen, then that takes it up to 20 if you count those as individuals. And then from 2008 or 2007 till I left full-time work at the end of 22, that 15-year period, I had one job. I was in one place. And that stillness that let me stay was totally a result of learning how to take care of myself, all the lessons that I learned on the side of the road when I was running and training and had you in my ears while I was doing miles.
And it's something that I think is really important to highlight is sometimes it's about asking yourself those questions, those
Yeah.
thought-provoking questions.
Yep.
And whether that's professionally or personally, like, what else? What is the next thing? And
Yeah.
the other aspect that this made me think of as you were telling the story, and I was just saying that, is the aspect of you can be asking yourself that in an entrepreneur, business owner mindset. Okay, what else? In a way that when you don't think the month is going well, and I'm going to
Yeah.
use a month example because I
Yep.
always have month goals.
Yep.
What else can I do? And what else? It's what else could go wrong, like my gap. And when I say that, I don't mean it from a negative point, but like, okay, I'm not meeting the month goal, but what else could have gone wrong that I corrected this month? And how
Yeah.
did I learn from that? And I think it's really important to sometimes go, okay, I need to ask myself those questions professionally, like we've been talking about, but also personally.
Personally.
Like, am I happy? What else could I be doing to feel the way I want to feel? And
Yeah.
one thing I've started to do is I set a goal to work out. Well, what I started realizing is, like, on my road trip, it was easy. We were doing things outside a lot of days. We were making sure, because of the hours in the car, we were getting out, walking, doing different things. But when I got to Alaska, it was very much, well, there's stuff to do, but if it rains, which, and it is technically a rainforest, so it
Yeah.
does rain. What are we going to be doing? And I figured I started to catch on that if I waited towards the end of the day, oh, I'm going to wake up, do my morning routine, just sit down on the
Yeah.
computer. I'll get to that later. I never got to it. So I started to go, what else can I be doing? What else? How can I arrange my schedule? And it flipped to, okay, if I wake up and do, take my medicine for the day, brush your teeth, the basic things. And instead of hitting my computer first, I'm going to spend the first 15 minutes of every day on my rowing machine or, doing
Yeah.
my different exercises.
Yeah.
Then it's already done. Now I can move forward. And I haven't missed a day on my to-do list when
Yeah.
I've done
Cool.
that shit.
And so you hit one of the most important lessons that I learned, going through this transition, right? And seeing how it reflected not only in my work, but how it reflected in my life. And that was, you have to adapt to the changing reality, right? I mean, you have to make a change. If you go, God, when I was living in Jersey, I could do this. It doesn't help, And if you go, gosh, if we could just get back to Jupiter, it would be this way, ain't going to help. You're here today. You got to adapt. You got to move forward. And that's critical to adapt to the changing reality. You have to accept how it is today, not how it was yesterday or how you want it to be tomorrow.
And I think that's a great point to leave off on and really leave the question with the audience is, what can you be doing to elevate yourself tomorrow and the next day? And asking yourself the question, which will be one of my key takeaways as well, as what else? And start there and start challenging yourself to ask that to you. What else can I be doing? And really dive into those questions for your personal life and your professional life. Mark, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Sure. So the best way is to get me on LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time hanging out there because of my business background, and it's Mark Wigginton, or you can do focusing on results either way. And that's ING, focusing, FOCUSING on results. And my website's focusingonresults.com. I'm happy to do a discovery call, as we talked about before, with anybody that's listening to the call today and would like to learn more.
Well, thank you, Mark, for all of your insight today and this really enlightening conversation. I've had lots of fun.
Yeah, me too. It was great.
And a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation include ask questions in different ways. And what I mean by that, and Mark really touched upon this early on in our conversation, that ask questions that make you want to know what the result is. This is the result. how do I work my way backwards in asking those questions to really get to the root cause? And so then you know the result, and now you just need to figure out the questions to ask instead of, like Mark said, asking the questions to get a no. And that's a lot of times the way we frame questions. Oh, I could potentially get a no. It's an unknown, but we're just going to ask it. And then I'll at least know it's a no. As well as there's nothing more important to your customer than their customer. I think this is something that we all need to be reminded of sometimes, even myself. And I love that Mark brought this up because it isn't always about, oh, they're ghosting you because you didn't actually get the job and they're not going to tell you, or you didn't sign that client, whatever it might be. It could just be they had other priorities that came up, or their schedule was not built in a way to make sure that this got done today. You had to take the back seat. As well as remember, you are a product. Mark has given us some great tidbits today, and this was one of them, because when you're going to sell yourself, and I think a lot of us forget sometimes that no matter our area we are at any point in our day, whether it's with potential friendships, businesses, you're always selling yourself. You are a brand. You are that product that Mark brought up. I really hit home with me is like, I'm trying to make new friends now. And I have to remember when I go into those environments, I'm not going to be for everyone, and that's okay. But I am selling my personality. I have to be able to get them to do that. So I love that sometimes taking out that perspective of emotions and going, okay, if I was a product, now I have to sell that product, is really important. As well as thought-provoking questions are asking open-ended questions and asking someone their opinion. And I think that is important, is realizing the person you're asking that question to, there's a reason you're asking that question, and they are an expert. So really ask them what is their opinion and make it a thought-provoking one where they have to step out of the box, like Mark said, and not that surface level answer that they've said a million times. And taking that a step farther, one thing Mark brought up is, as the person who's asking the questions, when you ask that question, don't shut your ears off, right? And I say that in a way of like, don't then tune out. You have to show interest in body language. You have to really pay attention to the words that are coming out and the way they're coming out so that you know the answer. As well as ask a question and ask the question, what else? So again, for all the listeners out there, the challenge I'm giving you that Mark brought up is start implementing the question, what else, into your daily routine. So start off by asking it once a day to someone, and do that to yourself too, and keep moving forward. Thank you this was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Mark Wigginton. Thank you for listening, and have a successful day.